Hello and thank you for joining me for Just a Thought. In Romans chapter 12 and verse 9, the second phrase found in that context is, abhor what is evil. Do I abhor what is evil? Now, we have to understand that sin is enticing. There's no doubt. Otherwise, no one would be tempted to sin. Do I realize what sin is? So let's answer those questions. Turn with me over to James chapter 1. And in James chapter 1, we're given a little bit of insight in regard to sin and its consequences. In James chapter 1, beginning in verse 13, let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. That word enticed there means to be entrapped. It's the idea of being caught, either by a net, by a hook, such as a fish, a net and a bird, and a fish and a hook, or even a live trap that you might trap a raccoon or a squirrel in. Caught. So I'm drawn away. I'm tempted when I'm drawn away by my own desires. Then I'm entrapped. Verse 15. Then when desire has conceived, that means I've fulfilled that desire. It gives birth to sin, and sin, when it's full grown, brings forth death. It's a serious matter. In fact, we read over in Romans chapter 6 and verse 23, for the wages of sin is death. The wages of sin is death. What that means is that the compensation of sin is spiritual death. What's spiritual death? Spiritual death is separation from God. Now, obviously, there are some reasons why we're tempted to sin. It's the flesh. That's, the flesh and the spirit are contrary to one another. In fact, we read about this over in Romans chapter 5. In Romans chapter 5, actually, it's not Romans chapter 5, it's Galatians chapter 5. In Galatians chapter 5, in verse 16, I say then, walk in the Spirit, and you shall not fulfill the lusts of the flesh. For the flesh lusts against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh, and these are contrary to one another, so that you do not do the things that you wish. So the Spirit in us, as Christians, we want to do what God says. But the problem is that we still have these desires that we're having to fight within. And those desires are of the flesh. And the flesh wants to be satisfied. And so there's this constant battle going on between the flesh and the Spirit. Remember what Jesus said to Peter, it seems specifically. He says, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak, when he had fallen asleep. While Jesus is over, praying to the Father 3 times prior to his arrest and crucifixion. So, getting back to Romans chapter 12 and verse 9, we are told to abhor what is evil. If we could see evil for what it really is, if we could see sin for what it really is from the perspective of God, the destruction that is in the wake of sin, we really would abhor it. So what we have to do is constantly fight against this flesh. Don't give in. Abhor what is evil. Abhor it, hate it, despise it. There's nothing tantalizing to it. There's nothing alluring to it. Just like that fish and that lure that comes across, if it only knew that if it were to bite upon that lure that it would be in the frying pan, it wouldn't be enticed to take the lure, to take the bait, ever. You and I know the end result of sin. It's death. So let's abhor sin. Let's abhor evil. Keep fighting.